My keycard flashed red at O. She'd be in the morning, 2 hours before the city inspectors arrived. My son-in-law stood behind the depot's glass doors with a paper coffee cup in his hand and mouthed, "Retired means gone." He did not know the oldest lock in that station had never needed a keycard. I stood there in the gray Pennsylvania dawn, my breath fogging the glass between us. The depot lights were already on inside, washing the marble floor in a pale yellow glow. I could see the inspection table set up near the ticket windows. White binders, fresh flowers, a silver coffee urn, everything polished for the kind of people who only visit old places when there is money to be made from them. Brent gave me a small smile, not a guilty one, not even an embarrassed one. It was the smile of a man who believed he had finally solved an inconvenience. I did not pound on the door. I did not shout my daughter's name. I did not remind him that I had opened that depot before sunrise for nearly 40 years, long before he ever learned to say words like redevelopment, asset value, or premium retail frontage. I simply held the keycard up to the reader one more time. Read. Then I slipped it into my coat pocket, turned away from the glass, and walked down the platform toward the old freight entrance. Before I tell you what happened next, let me say this. If you have ever given years of your life to a family, a job, a place, or a promise, only to have someone younger and louder tell you that your time no longer counted, then you will understand why I did not feel angry at first. I felt very still. My name is Samuel Price. I am 72 years old. For most of my adult life, I was the night supervisor at the Whitaker Rail Depot, a stone building with a green copper roof, 12 arched windows, and a waiting room clock that had not lost more than 3 minutes since Chungubek Sashipku. I was not the mayor. I was not a developer. I was not the kind of man whose name appeared on plaques at charity luncheons. I wore navy work shirts with my name stitched over the pocket. I carried a ring of keys heavy enough to pull one side of my belt down. I knew which radiator knocked before the first frost. I knew which platform tile lifted when rainwater seeped beneath the west wall. I knew where teenagers hid cigarettes, where pigeons nested in the eaves, and where my wife Helen used to leave paperbacks for children whose parents missed the late bus. That depot was never just a building to me. It was where Helen and I spent the better part of our marriage. She worked days at the county records office, and I worked nights at the station. On Fridays, she would bring me dinner in a blue metal lunchbox and sit with me under the big clock after the last train. She used to say old buildings remembered things people tried to forget. I believed her. Maybe that was why I stayed after the passenger line shut down. Maybe that was why I kept showing up when the city cut staff, when the roof leaked, when teenagers broke windows, when everyone else called the depot dead space. Dead space. That was Brent's favorite phrase. Brent married my daughter Laura 8 years ago. He was handsome in a polished way, the kind of man who owned 3 watches and checked each one as if time worked for him personally. He started out in real estate marketing, then moved into city redevelopment consulting, which mostly meant he could say something was underused with a straight face while standing in front of people who had used it all their lives. Laura was my only child. When she was little, she loved the depot. She would sit on the ticket counter with a juice box, swinging her legs, while I changed light bulbs or signed delivery forms. Helen taught her to read on the third bench from the west doors. There was still a tiny scratch in the wood where Laura had pressed too hard with a pencil while writing her name. But people grow up. Sometimes they grow away from the things that raised them. By the time Laura got a job in the city planning office, she had learned to talk about the depot differently. She stopped calling it Dad's Station. She called it the Whitaker site. She stopped saying Helen's Reading Corner. She called it a possible community engagement feature. When she introduced me to people from work, she used a bright, careful voice. "This is my father, Samuel. He used to do maintenance here." Maintenance. I let it pass the first time, then the second, then the 10th. A father can forgive a daughter for being embarrassed. We all try on new versions of ourselves and hope the old ones do not speak too loudly. But Brent did not just want Laura to forget where she came from. He wanted to profit from it. 6 months before the inspection, the city announced a proposal to convert the old depot into a mixed-use retail corridor. That was the phrase in the newspaper. Mixed-use retail corridor. It sounded clean, helpful, even. The drawings showed glass storefronts, rooftop seating, luxury apartments, and a small heritage display tucked near the restrooms like a polite apology to the past. I studied the plans at my kitchen table, with Helen's reading glasses sitting beside the sugar bowl. The archive room was gone. The old freight office was gone. The children's reading corner was gone. The memorial wall Helen had fought for was not just moved, it was erased. When I called Laura that evening, she sounded tired before I even spoke. "Dad, please don't start," she said. I looked down at the glossy proposal packet. "Start what?" "You're making this personal." "It is personal. It's a building." There are sentences that do not sound cruel until they come from someone who should know better. I waited a moment before answering. "Your mother did not think it was just a building." Laura exhaled softly, the way people do when they are trying to be patient with someone they have already stopped listening to. "Mom is gone," she said. "The city has to move forward." After that, Brent took over most of the calls. He had a talent for making insults sound like efficiency. "Samuel," he told me one afternoon, "your emotional attachment is valuable for storytelling, but not for planning." I was standing in the depot office when he said that. The old switchboard cabinet was open beside me. I had been repairing a loose wire because no one from the city had bothered to send an electrician. "Storytelling," I repeated. "Yes," he said brightly. "People like history. They don't necessarily need history running the project." I looked through the office window toward the waiting room. Dust floated in the sunbeams above the benches. For a moment I could almost see Helen there, stacking children's books on a rolling cart with that stubborn tilt of her chin. I said, "Be careful what you throw away, Brent." He laughed, not loudly, just enough. "Samuel, respectfully, this is exactly why Laura and I think it's time for you to step back." Respectfully. That word has been used to bury more people than dirt ever has. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way. Storms are quiet from a distance. My volunteer access hours were reduced. Then my storage permissions were removed. Then someone changed the lock on the records cabinet near the ticket booth. Laura told me it was all temporary. "Just until after inspection," she said. "What inspection?" A pause. That was how I learned the city inspectors were coming. Not from a letter, not from the planning office. Not from my daughter who had eaten peanut butter sandwiches on that station floor while I fixed the boiler. I learned because she forgot to hide her silence fast enough. The inspection was scheduled for Thursday morning at 7. A final walkthrough before the city board approved Brent's redevelopment partnership with a private investor group. If the inspectors signed off, the sale would move forward within days. "Dad," Laura said, "you have to trust me. I have always trusted you." Another pause. Then she said, "Then don't come." I held the phone to my ear and stared at Helen's lunchbox on the shelf across the kitchen. "Why not?" "Because Brent thinks you might make things difficult." "Does Brent know I still have official archive access?" "He says that doesn't matter anymore." There it was. Not said with hatred, not shouted. Just placed gently on the table like a folded napkin. That doesn't matter anymore. I did not sleep much that night. Around 3 in the morning, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with the old brass key in front of me. It had belonged to Helen before it belonged to me. A small, heavy, old-fashioned key tied to a faded blue ribbon. She used to wear it around her neck when we were younger, back when the city still cared enough about paper to lock it away properly. The key opened a door most people had forgotten existed. The freight archive passage. It ran behind the west wall, from the loading platform to the old records room. The passage had been sealed on every modern map because the newer staff used electronic access. But sealed on a map is not the same thing as sealed in brick. At Shibi, when my key card flashed red, I understood exactly what they had done. They had not simply forgotten to update my access. They had locked me out before the city arrived. I walked along the platform in the thin morning light. The rails beyond the depot were rusted and quiet. Weeds grew between the ties. Somewhere across town, people were waking up, making toast, arguing about school lunches, starting ordinary days. Mine had already become something else. At the freight entrance, I knelt beside a rusted utility box, half hidden behind an old stack of pallets. My knees complained. At 72, every dramatic gesture comes with a small invoice from the body. I brushed away dead leaves, found the iron plate beneath, and pressed the old brass key into the lock. For a second, it did not turn. Then the mechanism gave with a deep, familiar click. I stood there very still. There are sounds that bring back a whole marriage. That click brought back Helen's laugh, the smell of her hand lotion, the way she used to say, "Sam, someday this old place is going to need us to remember for it." I opened the narrow door and stepped into the passage. The air inside was cold and dry. My flashlight caught brick, dust, and the thin silver threads of spider webs. I moved slowly, one hand along the wall, until the passage opened into the archive room. No one had been in there for months, maybe years. The redevelopment team had labeled it storage hazard in their proposal, but it was not a hazard. It was a memory chamber. Metal file cabinets lined one wall. Wooden shelves held maps, ledgers, photographs, old passenger notices, maintenance books, union records, donation letters, and boxes Helen had labeled in her careful handwriting. I found the blue archive box exactly where she had left it. Covenant documents do not remove. My hands were steady when I lifted the lid. Inside was the original preservation covenant, signed 23 years earlier when the city first tried to sell the depot to a parking company. I remembered that fight. Helen had come home from the records office furious, carrying copies of deeds, maps, civic agreements, and old railroad trust documents. For 3 months, she ate dinner with one hand and highlighted legal clauses with the other. She can't be sold like scrap, Helen had said. She? I asked. The station. That was Helen. She gave souls to buildings and expected everyone else to catch up. The covenant had protected the depot as a civic memory site. It allowed restoration. It allowed public markets, education programs, community use. It did not allow private luxury conversion without approval from the final archive custodian. I turned to the last page. There, beneath Helen's signature and the city historian's seal, was my name. Samuel Price. Final archive custodian. I did not smile. Not then. Victory is not the first feeling when you discover your own child helped erase you from a document that still needed your name. I placed the covenant in a leather folder, then gathered the access log copies, old maintenance maps, Helen's preservation letters, and one photograph from the reading corner. In it, Laura was 7 years old, missing both front teeth, holding a book upside down while Helen laughed beside her. I almost left that photo behind. Then I put it in the folder too. By Yuk Sashipal, the inspectors had arrived. I could hear voices through the vent above the archive room. Brent's voice carried best. It always did. We are deeply committed to preserving the spirit of the depot, he said. Spirit. That was another word people used when they wanted to remove the body. I climbed the back stairs and entered the waiting room through the old records door. No one noticed me at first. The room looked beautiful. I will give Brent that. He knew how to dress a lie. Fresh flowers sat beneath the old clock. The benches had been polished. A display board showed digital renderings of the new retail corridor, complete with smiling families who looked like they had never waited for a delayed train in their lives. Laura stood near the ticket windows in a cream blazer, holding a clipboard against her chest. She saw me first. Her face changed. Not fear exactly. Worse, recognition. She knew what she had done before anyone else did. Brent stopped mid-sentence when he followed her gaze. His smile held for 1 second too long. Samuel, he said, this is not a good time. I walked toward the inspection table with the leather folder under my arm. One of the inspectors, a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked between us. Mr. Price? Brent laughed lightly. Samuel is a former employee, very beloved, very passionate, but no longer connected to the project. Former employee. I set the folder on the table. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. I am connected enough to have been locked out this morning, I said. Laura whispered, Dad. I looked at her. Not yet. That was all I said. Brent's jaw tightened, but his public face stayed in place. Samuel has been having a hard time accepting the transition. He is emotionally attached to the building. The inspector turned toward me. Is that true? Yes, I said. I am emotionally attached to the building. Brent's shoulders relaxed as if I had just helped him. Then I added, but I brought paper. The room went quiet. I opened the folder and removed the first page. This is the electronic access log printed from the depot's security office yesterday afternoon by Martin Hale, the weekend facilities clerk. It shows my archive keycard was active as of 7:00 p.m. I placed the second page beside it. This is this morning's access record. My card was deactivated at, say, Seychelles Chalet, 25 minutes before I arrived. One inspector leaned closer. Brent said, access updates happen automatically all the time. They do, I said, but not with email instructions. I placed the third page down. It was a copy of Brent's message to the private developer. Martin had found it left in the printer tray 2 days earlier and called me because he still remembered who had patched the roof over his mother's church fundraiser during the storm of Ichinpar. The line was highlighted. Keep the old man away from inspection. He will slow the sale down with archive nonsense. Laura closed her eyes. The inspector read the sentence twice. Brent's smile finally began to crack. That was taken out of context, he said. Then let's give it context, I replied. I removed the redevelopment deck and opened it to the page labeled Historical Preservation Summary. Helen Price's name has been removed from the memorial wall proposal. My 4 decades of maintenance and archive custody have been rewritten as a city-led initiative. The archive room is labeled a storage hazard. I looked at Laura then. Your mother spent the last year of her life cataloging that room with swollen hands because chemotherapy made her fingers stiff. She still tied every box with blue ribbon so children from this town could know what came before them. Laura's mouth trembled. Brent stepped forward. That is personal history, Samuel. We are discussing current legal authority. For the first time that morning, I looked directly at him. You should have started there. I removed the preservation covenant. Old paper has a dignity new paper cannot fake. It does not shine. It does not flatter. It simply survives. The inspector adjusted her glasses as I unfolded the last page. This covenant was executed 23 years ago between the city, the Whitaker Railroad Trust, and the County Historical Office, I said. It protects the depot from private conversion unless the final archive custodian signs a waiver. Brent gave a short laugh, too loud. That document is ancient. So am I said. But apparently we both still matter. No one laughed. The gray-haired inspector took the covenant from me. She read the final page. Her expression changed in a way I will never forget. Not surprise exactly. Correction. Mr. Price, she said slowly, you are listed here as the final archive custodian. Yes. She looked at Brent. Was this disclosed in your redevelopment packet? Brent opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Laura answered for him, very softly. No. The room changed after that, not loudly, no dramatic shouting, just a shift, like a train switching tracks beneath the floor. The second inspector called the city legal office. The historian on the panel, a thin man named Dr. Bell, who had once attended one of Helen's preservation meetings, asked to see the archive room immediately. Brent tried twice to interrupt and was ignored both times. That was when I saw my daughter begin to cry. Not the loud kind. Laura had always hated public emotion. Her tears stayed quiet, falling straight down her face while she stared at the photograph I had placed on the table. 7 years old, missing teeth, book upside down, Helen laughing. She touched the edge of the photo with one finger. I remember that day, she whispered. I said nothing. Sometimes memory should be allowed to hurt without being rescued. Brent was still trying to save himself. He told the inspectors I was obstructing progress. He said the covenant could be challenged. He said the city needed revenue. He said sentiment could not dictate planning. The gray-haired inspector finally looked up at him. Mr. Calder, she said, your proposal omitted a binding preservation instrument, misidentified the archive custodian, and removed protected historical material from the project summary. Approval is suspended pending formal review. Brent's face went pale beneath his expensive tan. Suspended? He repeated. Yes. For how long? As long as it takes. There are phrases more satisfying than revenge. As long as it takes is one of them. The developer representatives left first. They packed their binders quickly, avoiding Brent's eyes. Then the inspectors followed Dr. Bell toward the archive room. Soon only Laura, Brent, and I remained beneath the old clock. Brent turned on my daughter the moment the room emptied. You knew about this? He hissed. Laura looked at him like she was seeing the man behind the suit for the first time. No, she said. Then she looked at me, but I should have. Brent grabbed his briefcase. This is not over. I believed him. Men like Brent rarely understand endings unless a judge explains them. But I was not looking at him anymore. Laura stepped toward me. Dad, I raised my hand, not harshly, just enough. I can forgive a mistake, I said. I cannot pretend this was one. Her face folded. I was trying to save my job. You were trying to save a version of yourself that did not have to admit where she came from. That landed harder than I expected. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because truth spoken quietly has nowhere to hide. Laura looked down at the old photograph again. Mom would be ashamed of me. I shook my head. Your mother would be disappointed. Shame is what people like Brent use when they want control. Her breath broke. I picked up the photograph and handed it to her. She was not protecting a building, Laura. She was protecting the people you stopped seeing. For a long time, my daughter did not speak. Then she held the photograph against her chest and cried, like someone who had finally set down something heavy. The review took 4 months. The redevelopment partnership collapsed within 3 weeks. The private developer withdrew after the city opened an ethics inquiry. Brent resigned from his consulting position before anyone could ask him to, which is often how people describe falling when they want it to sound like stepping. Laura kept her job, but not her title. She was moved out of redevelopment review and into public records, which felt like Helen reaching through time with a raised eyebrow. My relationship with my daughter did not magically heal. Stories sometimes lie about that part. There was no sudden dinner where we laughed and pretended pain had not learned our address. Laura came by on Sundays. At first she brought coffee and sat in my kitchen without knowing what to say. Then she started asking about her mother's files. Then she began helping Dr. Bell catalog the archive properly. One afternoon she found the little scratch on the third bench from the west doors. Her own name, carved badly in pencil. She stood there touching it for nearly a minute. "I forgot I did that," she said. "I didn't. That was the beginning of something. Not forgiveness, maybe. Not yet. But a beginning." The depot reopened the following spring. Not as luxury apartments, not as a retail corridor with a fake heritage display. It became the Whitaker Community Market and Trade School. On weekdays, students learned electrical repair, carpentry, restoration, and mechanical basics in the old freight rooms. On Saturdays, farmers sold bread, apples, flowers, and honey under the station clock. In the west corner, where Helen's reading cart once stood, we opened a children's room with low shelves, yellow chairs, and a brass plaque that said, "Helen Price Reading Corner," for every child waiting to go somewhere. The old brass key sits in a glass case beside the entrance now. Next to it, because Dr. Bell insisted history should include the foolish parts too, is my deactivated red key card. Children ask about it sometimes. I tell them one key opened a door, and the other taught me who had closed it. Brent never came back to the depot. I heard he moved 2 counties over and started using phrases like strategic transition on a new group of people. I wish them strong coffee and better instincts. Laura still comes on Saturdays. Sometimes she brings flowers for Helen's Corner. Sometimes she helps children pick books. Sometimes she just sits on the third bench from the west doors, running her thumb over the faint pencil mark her younger self left behind. We do not talk about Brent much. We talk about her mother. We talk about the depot. We talk about old things that survived people who were too eager to replace them. As for me, I no longer work nights. My knees would not allow it, and the new students are better with ladders than I am anyway. But every Saturday morning, I arrive before the market opens. I unlock the front doors, turn on the waiting room lights, and stand for a moment beneath the clock. The building settles around me. Old pipes, old stone, old memory, still here. They were right about one thing. Retired did mean I was done working nights. It never meant I was done keeping the lights on. If someone ever tried to erase the years you gave to a place, leave a comment. Some work deserves to be remembered.